The fifth police car pulled into my driveway on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as two officers stepped out, their faces already showing the exhaustion of yet another false call. My hands trembled as I set down my coffee mug. 5 times. 5 times the HOA had sent law enforcement to my property with fabricated complaints and outright lies. I had never signed a single document with them, never attended a meeting, never agreed to their rules. My ranch cabin sat on land that was legally mine, completely outside their jurisdiction. But they did not care about facts. They did not care about property lines or legal boundaries. They wanted control, and they would destroy my life to get it. As I walked to the front door, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being their victim. That is when I realized they had picked the wrong person to mess with. 3 years ago, I bought the most beautiful piece of land I had ever seen. 40 acres of rolling hills, towering pine trees, and a crystal-clear creek that ran right through the middle of my property. After 20 years of saving every penny, working overtime, and dreaming about this moment, I finally had my slice of paradise. The ranch cabin I built was modest but perfect. A wraparound porch where I could watch the sunrise with my morning coffee. Large windows that let in the golden light filtering through the trees. A stone fireplace where I could warm myself on cold winter nights. This was not just a house. This was my sanctuary. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of birds singing and deer grazing in the meadow behind my cabin. I would step onto my porch, breathe in the clean mountain air, and feel grateful for the peace I had found. After years of city noise, traffic, and stress, this place healed my soul. My nearest neighbors lived half a mile away. We waved when we passed each other on the county road, but mostly we respected each other's privacy. That was the beauty of rural living: space to breathe, room to think, freedom to live life on your own terms. The property deed was clear as day. I owned every square foot of this land outright. No mortgage, no liens, no restrictions. I had researched everything carefully before buying. The previous owner had owned it for 30 years without any issues. It was completely independent with its own well water and septic system. About a mile down the road, there was a new subdivision called Pine Valley Estates. They had built maybe 50 houses over the past few years, all perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. I had driven through there once out of curiosity. Nice enough place, but not for me. I preferred the wild beauty of my untouched land. Sometimes I would see cars driving slowly past my property. People seemed curious about the lone cabin sitting among all those acres. A few times, I noticed people taking pictures from the road. I figured they were just admiring the scenery. Maybe they were thinking about buying rural property themselves. I spent my days working on small projects around the cabin, building a chicken coop, planting a vegetable garden, clearing walking trails through the woods. Simple work that connected me to the land and gave me a sense of purpose. Every evening, I would sit on my porch with a book and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. This was the life I had worked so hard to achieve: peaceful mornings, quiet evenings, the freedom to do what I wanted on my own property without bothering anyone or being bothered. I thought I had found the perfect place to live out my days. I had no idea that my peaceful existence was about to be shattered by people who had never set foot on my land, but somehow believed they had the right to control it. It was a bright Saturday morning in early spring when 3 strangers walked up my driveway. I was working in my garden, planting tomatoes, when I heard car doors slamming. I looked up to see a black SUV parked near my mailbox and 3 people in business casual clothes approaching my cabin. The woman leading the group was tall and thin, with short gray hair and the kind of stern expression that immediately put me on edge. She carried a thick folder and walked with the confidence of someone who was used to being in charge. The two men flanking her looked like they would rather be anywhere else. "Are you the owner of this property?" the woman asked without introducing herself. Her tone was sharp and accusatory, as if I had done something wrong by existing. "Yes, I am," I replied, standing up and brushing dirt from my hands. "Can I help you with something?" "I am Margaret Patterson, president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association. We have received multiple complaints about violations on this property." I stared at her in confusion. "Violations? What are you talking about? I am not a member of any homeowners association." She opened her folder and pulled out several printed pages. "According to our records, this property falls within the boundaries of our community. You are required to comply with our architectural guidelines and landscaping standards." "I think there has been a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My property is not part of your subdivision. I have never signed any HOA documents. I bought this land independently." Margaret's expression hardened. "Sir, we have done our research. Your property is subject to our covenants and restrictions. You have multiple violations that need to be addressed immediately." She began reading from her list. Unapproved exterior paint colors, non-compliant landscaping, unauthorized outbuildings, failure to maintain lawn according to community standards. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you have no authority over my property. I have owned this land for 3 years. I have never had any contact with your HOA. This is completely independent property." "That may be what you believe," she said with a condescending smile, "but the law is the law. We will be filing formal complaints with the county and pursuing all available legal remedies if these violations are not corrected within 30 days. I walked over to my truck and pulled out the folder where I kept my property documents. "Look, here is my deed. Here are my property surveys. Here are my tax records. This land is mine free and clear. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." Margaret barely glanced at the papers. "We will have our attorney review these documents. In the meantime, we expect compliance with our community standards." "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice rising. "You have no right to come onto my property and make demands. I suggest you leave immediately." One of the men stepped forward. "Sir, we are just trying to maintain property values for everyone in the community. Surely you can understand that." "I understand that you are trespassing on my land and making threats based on authority you do not have," I replied firmly. Margaret closed her folder and smiled coldly. "Mr. Johnson, we have been dealing with problem properties for years. We know exactly how to handle situations like this. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can pursue other options." "What other options?" I demanded. "We have excellent relationships with local law enforcement and county officials. We file complaints. We document violations. We pursue legal action when necessary. Most property owners find it easier to simply comply." The threat was crystal clear. They were going to use the system to harass me into submission. "Get off my property," I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. "Do not come back here again." Margaret handed me a business card. "You have 30 days to address these violations. We will be in touch." I watched them walk back to their SUV, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. As they drove away, I stood in my driveway holding their list of supposed violations, trying to process what had just happened. These people had come to my home. They had made demands. They had threatened me. And they had done it all with the absolute confidence that they had the right to control my life. I had no idea this was just the beginning. That evening, I spread all my property documents across my kitchen table and began researching everything I could find about Pine Valley Estates HOA. The deed was clear. The survey was definitive. My property was not part of their subdivision. It never had been. I found their community website and read through their covenants and restrictions. Nowhere did it mention my property address. Their community map showed their boundaries ending at the county road, a full quarter-mile from my cabin. This was insane. On Monday morning, I called Margaret Patterson directly. "Ms. Patterson, I have reviewed my property documents thoroughly. Your HOA has no legal authority over my land. I expect this matter to be dropped immediately." "Mr. Johnson, our attorney is reviewing the situation. We will be in touch with our findings." "There is nothing to review. My property is not part of your community. End of discussion." "We will see about that," she said before hanging up. 3 days later, I was replacing a broken fence post when I heard vehicles approaching. I looked up to see two sheriff's deputies walking toward me. My heart started pounding. I had never had police at my property before. "Are you Robert Johnson?" the first deputy asked. "Yes, sir. Is there a problem?" "We received a complaint about code violations on this property. Specifically, unlicensed construction and improper waste disposal." I stared at them in disbelief. "Officers, I have no idea what you are talking about. What unlicensed construction? What waste disposal?" The second deputy consulted his notepad. "The complaint states that you have built structures without proper permits and that you are burning trash in violation of county ordinances." "That is completely false," I said, my voice rising. "I have never burned trash on this property. Every structure on my land was built with proper permits. I can show you the documentation." The deputies looked around my property. Everything was clean and well-maintained. There was no evidence of any violations because there were no violations. "Sir, we don't see any problems here," the first deputy said. "But we had to respond to the complaint. Do you have any idea who might have filed this report?" I explained the situation with the HOA. The deputies exchanged glances. "Mr. Johnson, we get a lot of HOA disputes. Our advice is to document everything and consider getting a lawyer if this continues." After they left, I sat on my porch trying to process what had just happened. The HOA had filed false complaints with law enforcement. They had sent armed officers to my property based on outright lies. This was not just harassment. This was abuse of the legal system. I called Margaret Patterson again. "Ms. Patterson, did your organization file complaints with the sheriff's office about my property?" "We file reports when we observe violations of county codes." "You filed false reports. There are no violations on my property." "That will be determined by the proper authorities." "You had no right to involve law enforcement in your personal vendetta." "Mr. Johnson, we are simply following proper procedures. If you have nothing to hide, you should not be concerned about inspections." I hung up, my hands shaking with rage. These people were using the police as their personal enforcement arm. They were weaponizing the system against me. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 certified letters from the HOA. Each one made increasingly aggressive demands: paint my cabin beige, remove my vegetable garden, tear down my chicken coop, install approved landscaping. The letters threatened legal action, fines, and liens against my property. I responded to each letter with copies of my property documents, and a clear statement that I was not subject to their authority. I received no acknowledgement of my responses. Then the county inspector showed up. "Mr. Johnson, we received complaints about unpermitted structures and septic system violations." I showed him my permits. I showed him my septic system inspection records. Everything was in perfect order. He found no violations because there were no violations. "Sir, someone is wasting my time and your time with these false complaints," he said before leaving. I realized that Margaret Patterson and her HOA were not going to stop. They were going to keep escalating until they found a way to force me into compliance with rules that did not apply to me. That night I made a decision. I was going to start documenting everything, every phone call, every letter, every false complaint. If they wanted to play games with the legal system, I would be ready. The second police visit came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working on my computer when I heard the familiar sound of car doors slamming. Through my window, I watched two deputies approach my cabin with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Johnson, we have another complaint," the first deputy said when I opened the door. "This time about noise violations and operating a business without permits." I felt my stomach drop. What noise violations? What business? "The complaint states that you are operating heavy machinery at all hours and running some kind of commercial operation from your property." I looked around my quiet property. A few birds were singing in the trees. A gentle breeze was rustling the leaves. That was it. "Officers, as you can see, there is no noise. I am not operating any business. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. I use a computer, not heavy machinery." The deputies spent 10 minutes walking around my property. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But I could see the frustration in their faces. They were getting tired of being used as pawns in Margaret Patterson's game. "Sir, we are going to have to ask you to stop calling us out here for false complaints," the first deputy said. "I am not calling you," I replied. "The Pine Valley Estates HOA is filing these reports." "Well, somebody needs to cut this out. We have real crimes to investigate." 2 weeks later, they came back again. This time the complaint was about illegal dumping and environmental violations. Again, they found nothing. The deputies were clearly annoyed. "Mr. Johnson, if these complaints continue, we might have to start filing charges against whoever is making false reports." "I wish you would," I said. "I am being harassed by people who have no legal authority over my property." But the harassment was not limited to police visits. Margaret Patterson's campaign became more sophisticated and more intrusive. I started noticing cars driving slowly past my property multiple times per day. Different cars, different people, but always the same pattern. They would slow down, take pictures, and drive away. One morning, I counted 7 different vehicles that photographed my property. It felt like I was living under surveillance. I could not work in my garden or sit on my porch without feeling like I was being watched and documented. The certified letters increased in frequency and severity. They demanded access to my property for compliance inspections. They threatened daily fines. They claimed liens were being filed against my property. Each letter was more aggressive than the last. I called my insurance company to report the harassment. They advised me to document everything and consider legal action. I called the county attorney's office. They said it was a civil matter and suggested I hire a lawyer. My daily life became consumed by this conflict. I woke up each morning wondering what new harassment would come that day. I checked my mailbox with dread. I jumped every time I heard a car approaching. The stress was affecting my sleep, my work, and my mental health. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness. I was following all the laws. I was harming nobody. I was living peacefully on my own property. But these people had turned my sanctuary into a source of constant anxiety and fear. I started keeping a detailed log of every incident, photos of the cars that surveilled my property, screenshots of their license plates, copies of every letter, documentation of every false police report. The evidence was overwhelming, but I did not know what to do with it. Then I discovered something that changed everything. While researching property records online, I found evidence that the Pine Valley Estates HOA had been targeting other independent properties in the area. 3 other landowners had been subjected to similar harassment campaigns. One family had eventually sold their property and moved away rather than continue fighting. Another had caved to the pressure and agreed to join the HOA voluntarily. The third was still fighting, but had spent thousands of dollars on legal fees. I realized this was not personal. This was a systematic campaign to expand the HOA's territory and control. They were using harassment, intimidation, and abuse of the legal system to force independent property owners into submission. The pattern was always the same: false complaints to government agencies, surveillance and documentation, escalating threats and demands. They would keep applying pressure until people either gave in or gave up. Margaret Patterson and her HOA had perfected a system of legal bullying. They used their knowledge of bureaucratic processes to weaponize government agencies against innocent property owners. They counted on people being too intimidated or too broke to fight back. But they had picked the wrong target this time. I was not going to be intimidated. I was not going to give up. I was going to fight back with everything I had. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of this entire conflict. I was going to hire a lawyer. I spent 3 days researching attorneys who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. I needed someone who understood the law and was not afraid to take on organized bullies. I found David Martinez, a lawyer with 15 years of experience fighting HOA overreach. "Mr. Johnson, I have seen cases like yours before," David said during our first meeting. "What the Pine Valley Estates HOA is doing is harassment, plain and simple. They have no legal authority over your property, and they are using false complaints to intimidate you." I showed him my documentation: 3 months of photographs, letters, police reports, and surveillance evidence. David studied everything carefully. "This is actually a very strong case," he said. "They have created a clear pattern of harassment and abuse of process. We can file for injunctive relief to stop the harassment, and we can pursue damages for the emotional distress and interference with your property rights." "What will this cost me?" I asked. "I will work on a contingency basis. If we win, my fees come from the settlement. If we lose, you pay nothing. I am confident we can win this case." David immediately filed a motion for a temporary restraining order to stop the HOA's harassment. He also sent a cease and desist letter to Margaret Patterson, demanding an end to all surveillance, false complaints, and threats. The response was predictable. 3 days later, I received the 4th police visit. This time, the complaint was about illegal weapons and drug activity. The deputies who arrived were clearly frustrated. "Mr. Johnson, we know these complaints are false, but we have to respond to every report. This is getting ridiculous." "I understand, officers. My attorney is taking legal action to stop this harassment." "Good. We are going to start recommending criminal charges against whoever is filing these false reports." David used this fourth false police report to strengthen our case. They are not going to stop until we force them to stop, he told me. This latest complaint proves they are escalating despite our cease and desist letter. While David worked on the legal side, I continued my own investigation. I reached out to the other property owners who had been targeted by the HOA. Two of them agreed to speak with me. They destroyed our lives, said Mary Chen, whose family had sold their property and moved away. The constant harassment, the police visits, the legal threats, we could not take it anymore. We just wanted peace. I spent $12,000 fighting them, said Tom Rodriguez, who was still battling the HOA. They have unlimited resources and unlimited time. They just keep coming at you until you break. David was fascinated by these stories. This shows a pattern of racketeering behavior. They are systematically targeting independent properties to force them into their association. That is illegal. We began building a broader case that included the other victims. David filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the FBI about the HOA's pattern of harassment and abuse of process. The investigation revealed something shocking. Margaret Patterson and several other HOA board members had financial interests in expanding the association's territory. They were collecting management fees, landscaping contracts, and other revenue streams that increased with more members. This is not about property values or community standards, David explained. This is about money. They are using harassment and intimidation to grow their business. As our case developed, I started feeling hopeful for the first time since this nightmare began. I was not just fighting for my own property rights. I was fighting for every independent property owner who had been targeted by these bullies. David filed a comprehensive lawsuit against the Pine Valley Estates HOA, Margaret Patterson personally, and the management company. We sued for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of process, and conspiracy to interfere with property rights. The evidence was overwhelming. Months of documented harassment, false police reports, surveillance photographs, threatening letters, a clear pattern of systematic intimidation. They are going to try to settle this quietly, David predicted. They do not want this case to go to trial because it will expose their entire operation. But I did not want a quiet settlement. I wanted public vindication. I wanted everyone to know what these people had done. I wanted to make sure they could never do this to anyone else. We go to trial, I told David. I want a judge to hear exactly what they put me through. The fifth police visit happened on a Monday morning, just 2 weeks before our court date. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I saw the familiar patrol car approaching. But this time, I was ready. "Mr. Johnson, we have another complaint," the deputy said with obvious reluctance. "Illegal burning and air quality violations." I smiled and pulled out my phone. "Officer, I have been recording my property continuously for the past month. Would you like to see the footage from this morning?" I showed him the video. My property was peaceful and quiet. No fires, no smoke, no violations of any kind. "Sir, we are going to recommend that the district attorney file charges against whoever is making these false reports. This has gone on long enough." "I agree completely, officer. My attorney will be very interested in this latest incident." David was thrilled when I called him. This is perfect timing. They just proved they cannot control themselves, even with a lawsuit pending. This shows the judge that they will continue harassing you unless they are stopped by court order. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in early September. The courthouse was packed with residents from Pine Valley Estates, other property owners who had been harassed, and local media who had caught wind of the story. Margaret Patterson and her HOA had hired expensive attorneys who tried to argue that they had legitimate concerns about property values and community standards. They claimed they were just trying to protect their investment. David destroyed their arguments methodically. He presented evidence of their systematic harassment campaign. He showed the judge photographs of my well-maintained property. He played recordings of their threatening phone calls. Your Honor, the defendants have engaged in a pattern of harassment and intimidation that has no basis in law. They have abused the legal system to terrorize innocent property owners. This must stop. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that I was exaggerating the emotional distress and that they had legitimate concerns about my property. David called me to the witness stand. Mr. Johnson, please tell the court how this harassment has affected your life. I described the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the way my peaceful sanctuary had become a source of fear and stress. I explained how the false police reports had made me feel like a criminal in my own home. I bought this property to find peace. Instead, I found myself under attack by people who have no legal right to control my life. They have made me afraid to work in my own garden or sit on my own porch. The judge listened carefully to every word. When the HOA's attorney tried to cross-examine me, he focused on technical details about property lines and zoning regulations. But David had prepared me well. Sir, do you have any documentation showing that your property is subject to HOA rules? The attorney asked. No, because no such documentation exists. My property has never been part of any homeowners association. But surely you can understand the defendant's concerns about property values. I can understand wanting to maintain property values. What I cannot understand is harassment, false police reports, and systematic intimidation of innocent people. David presented our star witness, the county inspector who had been called to my property multiple times. He testified that every complaint against my property had been false, and that the repeated false reports were wasting government resources. In 30 years of inspection work, I have never seen such a clear pattern of harassment and false reporting, he testified. The judge asked Margaret Patterson to explain her association's actions. She tried to maintain that they were just following proper procedures, but her answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory. Ms. Patterson, do you have any legal documentation showing that Mr. Johnson's property is subject to your association's rules? Well, Your Honor, we believed that it might be included in our territory. Believed, based on what evidence? We felt that the property should be part of our community for the benefit of all residents. Ms. Patterson, feelings are not legal authority. You either have jurisdiction or you do not. The judge was clearly losing patience with the HOA's non-answers and legal gymnastics. After 3 days of testimony, he announced that he had heard enough evidence to make his ruling. The defendants have engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment that has no basis in law. They have abused the legal system and caused significant emotional distress to the plaintiff. This behavior is unacceptable and must be stopped immediately. Judge Harrison delivered his ruling on a Friday afternoon. The courtroom was silent as he read from his prepared statement. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the defendants have engaged in harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The Pine Valley Estates HOA has no legal authority over the plaintiff's property, and has used systematic intimidation to try to force compliance with rules that do not apply. My heart was pounding as the judge continued. The court awards the plaintiff damages in the amount of $75,000 for emotional distress and interference with property rights. The defendants are ordered to pay all legal fees and court costs. Additionally, this court issues a permanent injunction prohibiting any member of the Pine Valley Estates HOA from contacting the plaintiff, entering his property, or filing any complaints about his property with government agencies. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. After months of harassment and stress, justice had finally prevailed. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to the filing of false police reports. The evidence shows a clear pattern of abuse of the legal system. Margaret Patterson's face went white. The woman who had terrorized me for months was now facing criminal prosecution for her actions. Mr. Johnson, you have shown remarkable patience and courage in fighting this harassment. No property owner should have to endure what you have experienced. This court hopes that today's ruling will prevent similar abuse in the future. David and I walked out of the courthouse together, both grinning from ear to ear. You did it, he said. You stood up to the bullies and won. The local newspaper covered the story extensively. The headline read, HOA ordered to pay $75,000 for harassment of independent property owner. The article detailed the months of false complaints, surveillance, and intimidation. Within a week, I received calls from 3 other property owners who had been targeted by similar HOA harassment campaigns. They wanted to know how they could fight back. Document everything, I told them. Find a good attorney. Do not let them intimidate you into giving up your rights. The ripple effects of our victory continued for months. The State Attorney General's office launched an investigation into HOA abuse tactics. Several other homeowners associations changed their policies after seeing what happened to Pine Valley Estates. Margaret Patterson was forced to resign from the HOA board. 2 other board members also stepped down. The new leadership sent me a formal letter of apology and a promise that no one from their association would ever bother me again. I used part of the settlement money to install a beautiful stone gate at the entrance to my property. The sign reads, "Private property, no trespassing violators will be prosecuted." It serves as a reminder that I fought for my rights and won. My ranch cabin is peaceful again. I wake up each morning to the sound of birds singing, not the sound of car doors slamming. I work in my garden without fear of surveillance. I sit on my porch in the evenings without anxiety about who might be watching. The stress and fear are gone, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. I stood up to organized bullies who thought they could intimidate me into submission. I proved that ordinary people can fight back against abuse of power and win. Most importantly, I protected not just my own property rights, but the rights of every independent property owner who refuses to be bullied into compliance with rules that do not apply to them. Sometimes the system works, sometimes justice prevails, sometimes the little guy wins.